Welcome again, everybody. Scott Griffin here with Rodney Orr of Tiger Insider, the Tide and Tiger podcast, or like we like to call it, the Rodcast with Rodney Orr. Rod, how are you?
Doing great, Scott. How are you?
You love the Rodcast stuff, don't you?
I love it.
You really
do. I love it. Great name.
Yeah,
great name.
Absolutely. We're going to try to do these before the games this year. We'll obviously have different things going on all week long on Tiger Insider and Tide and Tiger for you, video-wise and podcast-wise. This one brought to you by Hong Kong Tailors in Birmingham, but you can visit them from anywhere. They will just give you the most exquisite fabrics and fit you've ever had in tailored clothing. Hong Kong Tailors. It's right there in Homewood. You can go to KirpalaniTailors.com and check out all the incredible fabrics they have from Holland & Sherry, Dormé, and much more. It's who fits me for my clothes, and they are absolutely fantastic. Hong Kong Tailors in Homewood, Alabama. All right, Rod, we had Nick Saban last night, and you and I kind of, I don't think we expected anything crazy, but he was pretty darn jovial, wasn't he?
Yeah, for Nick Saban, I thought he seemed really upbeat, talked about how he felt like that the intensity was good at practice and that mentally the team was better. I'm not really sure exactly what that meant, but he obviously felt like they had improved. For Nick Saban, it was certainly seemed to be upbeat, even though overall I would say the 6-minute and 46-second post-practice press conference was kind of ho-hum for the most part, but he did seem upbeat.
He really did. All right, so you and I go to the viewing practice, and obviously we were looking for Raekwon Davis. They were way on the other end. I didn't see him. I don't think you saw him, but what does your intel say?
Yeah, I think, Scott, he actually was in a black jersey. I did not see him actively participating in the drills that we see, which let's be clear, they're very limited. It's only, I think yesterday we were in there, maybe 5 or 6 minutes maximum. Did not see him actively participating, but he was moving around a little bit. I think he has practiced some this week. In fact, Coach Saban said last night that he had practiced some yesterday. So I think Raekwon Davis plays. I think he was set to start before this incident where he was, of course, grazed on the leg by a stray bullet last weekend at a local bar or outside a local bar. But I think he was slated to start. Will he start in this game? Who knows at this point, but I do think that we'll see Raekwon Davis, number 99, playing on the defensive line probably very early in this game.
Yeah, and as you said, we may not see a start, which means I'm guessing Joshua Frazier, who's had a good fall according to Nick Saban, steps up. I'm not sure it's one of the – I think it's like wide receiver, right? It doesn't really matter who starts. We're going to see a lot of guys.
Absolutely. You're going to see a rotation, especially on that defensive line. You like to keep guys fresh. That's been an area that we've talked about repeatedly that was one of the main concerns of this team, or certainly a question mark. How quickly would some of these younger players develop, give Alabama some depth that they could rotate in there. I think Carl Dunbar's done a fantastic job bringing these guys along in fall camp. We'll see. Our indications throughout August are this area might turn out to be a little bit better than maybe we first expected. As you mentioned, Josh Frazier has lost 25 or 30 pounds. He's always been a guy with talent, Scott, out of Springdale, Arkansas. He's now a senior. And like I said, he's always had the talent. The ability hasn't been lacking. In fact, he had a pretty good game last year in the national championship game against Clemson when he had the opportunity to play. And if he's in shape and motivated, Josh Frazier's a really good player.
Yeah, and sometimes it takes a while for it to click with some guys, doesn't it, under Nick Saban? They hang in there, they don't transfer, but then suddenly something mentally sets off and they become pretty solid players.
Yeah, I think with some guys like Josh Frazier, he's a smart kid. I think sometimes what happens is it's maturity. It's also, all of a sudden they realize, hey, I'm a senior. Is this my money year? That kind of clicks, that light goes off, and it motivates some guys. And, Josh Frazier, like I said, he's always had the ability, Scott. It's just a matter of flipping the switch and making the decision that he wanted to be the best he could be. And, again, he looks good physically. He's a guy that can certainly add a great deal to this defensive line.
To me, this is maybe one of the keys to this team is the depth of the defensive line and how it develops. We know the talent is there. Do you agree with that statement?
Oh, absolutely. Been talking about it since last year, actually. And, when you saw the guys that were departing, Jonathan Allen, Dalvin Tomlinson, and even those guys on the outside, Ryan Anderson, Tim Williams, you knew that all of those guys were extremely valuable. And so over the last 2 years, actually, Alabama's lost a lot of players up front. Now you look at it, Deron Payne, he's a guy that I think has the opportunity to be one of those great defensive linemen that Alabama's had in the past. I think this is Deron Payne's year to kind of make that happen, the junior out of Shades Valley, and he looks primed and ready. Deshaun Hand, we've mentioned Raekwon Davis, Josh Frazier. Quentin Williams is a redshirt freshman out of Winona that I think everyone should keep an eye on. Johnny Dwight is a guy that could make an impact too. He's been around a while. He's made some progress. Certainly some other guys in the mix. We talked about the two true freshmen, Fadarian Mathis and LeBron Ray. Now, how quickly will some of those guys make strong impacts? Difficult to say, but I do think that the top 6 guys on the defensive line look really good, heading into this game. So Alabama should have a pretty good rotation against Florida State on Saturday night.
Okay, let's stay with freshmen because Nick yesterday as well said that 10 or 11 are in the starting 2, I guess, if you look at the depth chart. Obviously, that's going to be, Ruggs and Devontae Smith, and then a few wide receivers, obviously, and Moses, right, and different guys. Who else do you think is
certainly
in that?
A lot of guys, Yeah, the wide receiver core alone, Scott, there's 3 guys. You mentioned Devontae Smith and Henry Ruggs. There's Jerry Jeudy out there as well, who was a star of the 8A game, as you recall. Jedrick Wills is a true freshman at right tackle who's actually competing for a starting job there. But probably, my guess right now, Matt Womack, the starter. But those 2 guys listed right at the top of the depth chart, they're at that position at the right tackle spot. You're probably going to have some guys on the defensive side that I think will probably play as true freshmen right now in this game. Obviously, you mentioned Dylan Moses. Chris Allen is another guy to keep an eye on as far as, getting some snaps in this particular game. And, last but certainly not least, would be Najee Harris. I think that's the guy that all Alabama fans are waiting to see, this young, fantastic running back out of California, who a lot of people had the number 1 player and some had the number 1 running back in the country, certainly. And I think everyone's excited, even though you saw glimpses of him in A-Day. I think a lot of people think that, he's going to be a really special contributor to this team as a true freshman this year.
All right, Josh Jacobs staying with the backs. We saw him Monday, and he looked pretty good. We thought 75% moving around. I did not notice him in the latest time that we got to view media, and Nick Saban was less optimistic about him.
Yeah, said if he didn't practice today that he probably would not play in the game. And of course, now there's no media viewing period today, so we will not know if he actually practiced unless Coach Saban addresses that on his radio show tonight. But, Josh Jacobs has missed a lot of time. Now, he has been back the last few days, as you noted. He's been dressed out. He's been going through some of the running back drills. He looks like, Scott, he's getting much, much better with that hamstring. Coach Saban saying last night that he still was rehabbing it, trying to get all the strength back in it before they rush him out there. My guess is in this game that Josh Jacobs might not see the field. In fact, I'm leaning towards that he won't. What I think you'll see at the running back, in the running back rotation, Scott, is Damian Harris and Bo Scarborough, or it may be Bo Scarborough, Damian Harris, 1-2, either way. I think both of those guys certainly you'll see them early. When exactly Najee Harris will get in the game, I'm not sure, but definitely the freshman from California will be in the mix there. And I think you'll see all 3 of those guys kind of rotating in and out throughout the game. But keep an eye on Damian Harris, Scott. I think, to me, he was the most quietest, if you will, or most unsung 1,000-yard
Oh,
rusher
yeah, no
in
doubt.
school history last year. And I think right now Damian Harris is in really good shape. He's dropped about 12 pounds, a little bit quicker, a little bit faster. I think Damian Harris is going to have a really good year again this year.
All right, so where does that leave Brian Robinson, who also has had a strong fall, according to the intel that are talking to us? So
Yeah.
where's he? And then with Josh Jacobs coming back, I'm not sure you need 5 backs, but
No.
could he withstand a redshirt year? What do you think on that?
Yeah, I think it's very possible you see Brian Robinson maybe redshirt, but I think you could possibly see him on special teams. I really don't think that's out of the question. May get some mop-up duty as a running back. And again, you never know at the running back spot. Guys go down very quickly. We look at fall camp. There was 6 guys. B.J. Emmons transferred. Najee Harris was struggling a little bit early on with the hamstring. Josh Jacobs has been out a while with a hamstring. Bo Scarborough has injury history. So you've got to be really careful. You never know. Number 24, Brian Robinson, the true freshman out of Tuscaloosa Hillcrest, he's looked very, very good, not only in spring because he was an early enrollee, but also throughout August camp. He's a 230-pound load of a running back. I mean, this guy is not only brings power, he's got some speed. He's an excellent receiver out of the backfield. He's a guy that could start or certainly play a lot at some schools that needed a guy to step right in and play. But, what his exact role will be, we'll see. I do think you'll see those 3 guys that I mentioned, Damian Harris, Bo Scarborough, Najee Harris in this game. And I think later, as soon as number 8, Josh Jacobs, gets his hamstring back in order, you'll see him in the mix because he's so versatile, not only as a runner, but also as a receiver, and you can move him around.
Yeah, and I agree with Josh Jacobs. I don't see any reason to play him in this game. He's a change of pace back. He's Kevin Falk of the Patriots offense. And why in the world would you play him when you have 4 other backs? And like you said, 3 surely can split the carries and do yeoman's work for you, I would think,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Generally the rotation is 2 guys. And if you've got a 3rd guy, you remember there's been times when they've used maybe a guy like a Roy Upchurch in that 3rd back role that comes in, catches passes, does special things. So we'll see those 3, as I mentioned, and then we'll go from there. And as the season moves along and Josh Jacobs is ready, I think we'll see him certainly have his role.
I get the feeling Burton Burns has autonomy in putting guys in. Do you get that feeling?
Probably to some extent, at least as whatever extent that Nick Saban will allow it. I think he certainly trusts Burton Burns, who is, clearly has to be one of the best running back coaches in the country, and the job that he's done. And listen, I know people think, well, how difficult is it to be a running back? There's a lot of responsibilities. There's blitz pickup. There's all kinds of little things that running backs have to do and recognize. And he does a fantastic job of developing these guys. And so I think certainly Nick Saban trusts Burton Burns as one of his key assistants.
And look, those 2 things are going to be huge, because Jalen Hurts is going to be under center more. He's going to be throwing to tight ends more, which means backs are going to be in more depending on the situation, have to make sure there's a blitz pickup or just pick up any pressure. Then they're going to have to leak out and catch more passes than we've seen. So they're going to, I think, have to be total complete backs, which is really only going to help their NFL stock.
Yeah, and that's always really the way it's been. I know what you're saying. There's certainly going to be more of that now with the way that they're going to, utilize all the personnel and the things that they're going to do, and these running backs are going to be called on to do different things. So you're absolutely right. There is going to be more of that. But, to some extent or to a large extent, the running backs have always had a big role here in different areas in terms of picking up the blitz and all those things. And if you couldn't do it, you weren't going to play. So that's always been demanded, and I think it's probably even more so now.
Scott Griffin, Tide and Tiger, Rodney Orr, Tider Insider, partnering up on the Tide and Tiger Rodcast. We call it when Rodney Orr joins us. I did notice, and I don't think we've talked about it much on our podcast this week, on the depth chart that they gave us, and I'm sure you noticed there was tight end, then there was tight end -H for H-back, and there were different personnel there. Miller Forrestall was on both, I think, so was Irv Smith. But it tells you how important the tight end. It told me that in this offense that they can put him as a back, they can put him as a fullback, then put him in motion, they can put him in traditional tight end. I think this is going to be a versatile position too.
Yeah, it is, and the guys there are versatile. I mean, obviously, Hell Hinches is probably going to be more of an inline tight end, I would think. For the most part, he's a solid blocker. He's been utilized a little, not much, as a receiver. But you look at Irv Smith and Miller Forrestall, those two guys, they're really versatile. Miller Forrestall is about a 6'5", 240-pound guy now. He's added about 25 pounds. So he was outstanding last year, catching a few balls as a receiver at the tight end spot. But also he made a couple of key blocks as well. And then Irv Smith, I think that's the guy to really keep an eye on. I've mentioned him before out of New Orleans, just a sophomore. He and Forrestall both are sophomores. Irv Smith is a guy, Scott, that, his dad was a former NFL player, played at Notre Dame. So he's kind of got the bloodlines. You can see it in his play. He's really natural. He has the ability to get downfield, make plays in the passing game. He's a strong blocker. I just think he's got all the tools to be outstanding, and I think he's going to be a difference in this offense this year.
Look, and I think that Hale Hinges has to catch some balls too, so it's not obvious he's in for blocking, and then Forrestall and Irv Smith come in as a pass threat. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think you'll see two of them in there some as well. Obviously, you're going to see that happen. But, yeah, I think Hinches possibly will catch it more this year, but you have to also remember, too, now, last couple of years with O.J. Howard there, most of the time when the tight end was getting some attention in the passing game, it was to number 88. So, we might see Hinches catch a few more this year.
All right, and getting back to another comment I said, you agree quarterback under center more play action, more things. I think we may even see some eye before it's all done. Not exclusively, but they're not going to get away from the elements that were successful last year either. I think it's a hybrid offense.
I think it's a great point. I think you're going to see a mixture of everything. I think you will see the quarterback under center. How much more, don't really know, but I think you will see that. But, again, I think there's probably not much that we won't see when you're talking about, utilizing all the personnel. You'll see running backs. You may see two running backs. It would not surprise me to see Damian Harris and Bo Scarborough in the backfield together at some point, or Damian Harris and Najee Harris, whatever the combination might be.
Yeah, that
would not surprise me. Again, I'm not saying it's going to be a staple of the offense or what have you, but I do think that you may see some of that occasionally. I think you'll certainly see running backs, especially when Josh Jacobs gets back, I think. And you may see Najee Harris in this role as well, is lined up in the slot, running routes, catching passes. Tight ends heavily involved as receivers this year. I think you'll see all of those things with Brian Daboll's offense because, again, he's versatile and they utilize all their personnel.
All right, so this is key because after Florida State, it's Fresno State, Colorado State, Vandy. I'm not sure you're going to learn a lot about your team. You can certainly expand your offense and get a ton of work in and hopefully win those games. You should win them, obviously, if you're Alabama. So to me, it makes the Florida State game even bigger. You get that thought, or you disagree with that?
Well, I can certainly see that. Yes, absolutely. I mean, now all those games that you mentioned, Colorado State, by the way, had a very impressive win over Oregon State last week and kind of opened your eyes with all the points they scored. So, but yeah, I think so, Scott. I think you learn a lot about your team. And even Nick Saban said that last night in an opener such as this, with a bigger, not only name opponent, but an opponent like Florida State with the high quality of athletes that they have. This is not just a named team in Florida State. They've recruited extremely well. They've got great players on both sides of the ball. So I think it's a real challenge, and it's going to give Alabama an early indication of where they are. Now, I'll say this about Alabama, too, and that is that Obviously, they come into this game number one in the country. A lot of new faces, though. There's no question that this is an extremely talented Alabama team. I think it may be the fastest defense that they've put on the field in the Nick Saban era. Now, is that saying this is the best defense? Not even close to saying that. We don't know. There's so many new faces. But I do think when you look at Deron Payne and you look at the development of some of these young defensive linemen that we've mentioned, and we didn't even mention Isaiah Buggs, the junior college defensive lineman, that I think has a chance to make a major impact up front defensively. But I think Christian Miller, Anthony Jennings, Terrell Lewis, Rashawn Evans, Sean Dion Hamilton. I'm really high on that group of front seven type defenders. I think those guys can make a huge impact. I think in the secondary, it's going to be really interesting at that left corner spot. Trevon Diggs has great potential there, stepping in for Marlon Humphrey. But Levi Wallace, the walk-on, who actually did a nice job coming in for Humphrey last year in the Auburn game, if you remember when Humphrey popped a little hamstring. He started, Levi Wallace did, at corner in the SEC championship game, has done a nice job in fall camp. He's really competing for that spot. But I say all that to say this, I think as this defense meshes together, they have a chance to be outstanding. But where we are right now is how will they respond, Scott, with a quarterback like DeAndre Francois and, of course, a play caller like Jimbo Fisher? Certainly going to be a challenge for all these new faces on the Alabama defense.
Remember, Florida State gave up 31 sacks last year. Their offensive line, I wouldn't call it porous, but their left tackle's the next defensive end. That's not good. So, if Anthony Jennings and those guys can bring it, it could be trouble. And Rodney did not make a mistake, folks. It's Terrell Lewis now. It was Hall for about half of fall camp, and he changed it to Lewis. So Terrell Hall Lewis, or however you want to call him, as Rodney said, should be a pretty big impact player. No Saban assistant has ever beaten him. Jimbo Fisher is 10-1 against SEC teams, which is an absolute unbelievable stat. Something has to give here.
Yeah, those are two interesting statistics there. And look, I think FSU is the best opening opponent that Alabama's had in quite some time, certainly since Nick Saban's been here. And you look back and at those openers that Alabama's had, all these neutral site openers against the USC and Michigan, some really outstanding Frank Beamer teams at Virginia Tech. They opened at Clemson, of course, with Clemson in 2008 in Atlanta. So they've had some named teams. But I think this is, as far as the quality of the team, I think this is the best or probably the most competitive opponent that Alabama will open with. It's obviously they're very talented players. So this is going to be a real challenge, I think.
Anything else jump out at you with Florida State? I know their defensive front is really good. They have Derwin James, who I think he and Minkah Fitzpatrick are the two best defensive secondary players in America. Marcus Thomas is back, their leading tackler at linebacker. Jimbo Fisher told me 2 weeks ago he would be back. A lot of people didn't think so, but that was announced yesterday. This is a really good defense. This could be a mucky in the teens or low 20s game, couldn't it?
I mean, possibly, and some people are saying it might resemble that LSU, some of the LSU games. I don't think it's going to be like that. That's just my guess. Again, the first week of the season, usually the offenses are behind, so who knows? It may keep the scoring down a little bit. And, of course, two really outstanding, gifted defenses athletically. You mentioned Matthew Thomas, and, of course, he was once an Alabama recruit. A little trivia for you, Scott. When it came down to it, Alabama took Tim Williams over Matthew Thomas.
That was a good move.
Took Tim Williams. Yeah, good move.
Turned out all right.
Of course, both those guys have been good players. But you look at Florida State defensively, their ends are a little smaller. I guess Brian Burns is a 6'5", 220-pound guy. Last year, led the nation among freshmen with 9.5 sacks, so he really gets after the quarterback. He's another guy Alabama recruited, by the way. Josh Sweat, about a 250-pounder on the other side. So where am I going with that? I think, first of all, Alabama, when they throw the ball, going to have to really protect on the outside, the edges, the rush on Jalen Hurts. But also, when you look at it and what Alabama, I think they're going to do is to line up and try to really pound the football. And you wonder, can they wear on these smaller defensive ends of Florida State by doing that. So I think that's going to be an interesting matchup to keep an eye on. On the other side of the ball with DeAndre Francois, you mentioned the sacks last year. He took a beating. There's no question about that. He was on the ground quite a bit, which really is admirable the way he hung in there. I think Alabama comes after him really hard, Scott. I think you're going to see blitzes, maybe some blitzes that we haven't even seen from Alabama. I wouldn't be surprised to see Minkah Fitzpatrick coming as a blitzer, Ronnie Harrison coming as a blitzer from the safety spot. I think we could see a variety of things like that to really get after DeAndre Francois and get him, kind of out of sorts. And then again, that will be interesting because it would Jimbo Fisher, how would he respond, to that? So I think it's going to be a really good matchup. I look forward to it.
And look, Jeremy Pruitt likes to blitz about 50% of the time anyway. That could be ramped up, right? That number could be 60, 70 till Francois proves with an inexperienced wide receiver crew. I mean, they got a few frontline guys that are really good, but until they prove they can handle it, you might see 70, 75% of the time.
Well, that's a good point because, their receivers, they lost their top 4 receivers from last year. And again, it's not, like you said, it's not that they don't have some talented guys. They do have a couple of 3 or 4 really talented guys that I think can make a difference. But they're not quite what they were. But, yeah, I like I said, I do think you're going to see Alabama really come after Francois and try to get him off balance a little bit. And, then you have Jaquez Patrick and Cam Akers, 2 outstanding running backs that they have at Florida State. If Alabama can do what they like to do, which is take away the run and make Francois the centerpiece, that'll be real interesting.
All right, we wrap up with the thing that makes Alabama fans nervous and has for many years at some point, kicking. If this is close, it could be kicking. Now, at last report, you and I talked, the kicking had a good week, had a real good scrimmage, 7 of 8, if I remember, on field goals, and 2 or 3 of those in the driving rain, including a 51-yarder by J.K. Scott. But do they go with Bulovas and then Papanastis, or is it Papanastis for short and J.K. Scott for long till Bulovas develops, or what's the latest?
Yeah, I thought it would be a 2-kicker system with Papanastos and handling the shorter range kicks and J.K. Scott the longer range kicks. But if you look at the depth chart now, it seemed like maybe they may be leaning towards the direction of going with Papanastos on the shorter and Bulovas on the longer kicks. But, we'll see. We'll see how it pans out. But all 3 of those guys have made some progress doing it in fall camp. Early on, it was really kind of concerning. But I think a lot of that, too, was the operation of it, the snap, to hold the kick, because you've got a new snapper, a new holder, and a new kicker. Mm-hmm. So I think they got better and better.
And the holder is J.K. Scott for folks listening in, and that's normal. That's NFL protocol for punters to hold for kickers. Bulovas, who handles kickoff? We've seen J.K. Scott do that. Bulovas has a strong leg. Who do you see on that deal?
I think it's a good chance you'll see J.K. Scott on handling the kickoffs. And if he does have to place kick, if he does kick the longer field goals, the question is who will hold. And I'm not sure. Maybe Tua Tagovailoa, the backup quarterback who did a lot of it in spring. If you remember, he was a holder in A-Day. So, again, that's the special teams are really big. J.K. Scott has had a great fall camp. And, it's just kind of par for the course for him. He's been a great punter. I saw someone on TighterInsider.com talking, Scott, about how, or posted a message that J.K. was actually his average was down, has been down a little bit. Well, down for him is 44 yards.
Right.
That's the lowest he's had in a season. So, okay, we're getting a little bit spoiled here with J.K. Scott.
And you got to factor in hang time and returns and all that stuff to really get a true, factor into that. Okay, Rodney, finally, a lot of people are interested in kick returns. We've seen Trayvon Diggs there in the past, Marks, all kind of talented guys could be back there. We've even heard Ruggs. What do you got?
Yeah, like you said, that's a question that a lot of people are asking right now as the game's getting close. And I think Trevon Diggs, I think you'll see him back there early on, Scott, as a punt return guy. That would be my guess. He was really good at it last year. I do think Henry Ruggs is very talented, true freshman. He's a game breaker type player. I think you might even see him eventually. I don't know if he'll be the first guy back there in this game, but I think you'll see him back there at some point. Now, on the kickoff returns, I think the combination, just a guess here, would be Trevon Diggs and Henry Ruggs. Either one of those guys, very explosive, with the ability to take it to the house from any spot. So that's my guess right now heading into this game. Coach Saban really hasn't been extremely clear on that.
All right, so we'll look for that. Also, Saturday night, 7 o'clock at Mercedes Benz Stadium. Remember, you can go to the YouTube channel, check out Tide and Tiger. That's where we have all the videos. Rodney and I on there, practice videos, Nick Saban players, and much more. And then Tide and Tiger at podbean.com. A lot of this stuff linked as well to Tider Insider. How can people get involved with your site?
Yeah, it's $48 a year, tiderinsider.com, and get instant access with your credit card, or if you prefer, there's a check there, address to send a check. Scott, that gives everybody access to all our premium information on the front page, as well as our forums, where there's a constant flow of information, discussion, anything about college football, especially obviously about Alabama. You'll find it right there on that forum for sure, and on our front page, where not only do we have premium information, but we have a lot of video, a lot of it provided by Tide and Tiger, some of our practice updates and the video and the interviews and all the press conferences and so forth. And also Tider Insider TV with me and Gary Harris on our statewide TV show, WVUA 23, our weekly TV show. You can watch it right there. It's posted on the front page.
Thanks for listening. Our podcast brought to you by Hong Kong Tailors there in Homewood. Be sure you check them out at KerpelaniTailors.com, Tider Insider, and Tide and Tiger. For Rodney Orr, Scott Griffin saying so long. We'll talk to you after the game, give you our perspective of that in a few days after Bama and Florida State. Enjoy the game, everybody.